My wife sneered. I slept with him. Get over it. I didn't yell, just slid a drafted resignation on the table. By dawn, her boss called Breathless. Who saw this? What have you done? You know what they say about the man behind the curtain. Nobody ever looks at him until the magic trick goes horribly wrong. For 10 years, I was that man. My name is Silas. I am 38 years old, and if you had asked anyone in our social circle a few months ago, they would have told you I had the perfect life. I was married to Cassandra, a woman whose ambition could cut glass. She was 35, stunning, sharply intelligent, and rising through the corporate ranks of a top-tier logistics firm like a rocket. Me? I was the guy at home. I made the artisan coffee at 6 in the morning. I picked up the dry cleaning so her power suits were perfectly pressed. I managed the calendar, the meal prep, the contractors who fixed the roof. But I wasn't just a house husband. Once upon a time, I was a senior communications strategist. I wrote copy that moved millions of dollars in products. I crafted brand narratives that saved sinking companies. But a few years into our marriage, when the economy took a dive and one of us had to take a step back so the other could take a massive leap forward, I volunteered. I transitioned to freelance consulting, working quietly from my home office, taking on just enough clients to keep my brain sharp while Cassandra chased the sun. I didn't mind the compromise. In fact, I was proud of her. I loved her deeply. When she got her first director-level promotion, I was the one who wrote her introductory speech to the board. I spent 3 days polishing every sentence, embedding her natural cadence with the kind of visionary leadership jargon those executives devoured. She stood on that stage, delivered my words flawlessly, and took all the credit. That was our dynamic. She was the face of the franchise, and I was the ghostwriter in the shadows. For a long time, it felt like teamwork. I thought we were building an empire together. I would sit in my quiet kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, looking at the life we had bought with her salary and my invisible labor. A beautiful house in the suburbs, 2 luxury cars in the driveway, a retirement account that was compounding nicely. But isolation does funny things to a man's perspective. When you spend all your time making someone else shine, you forget to notice when their light stops shining on you. The shift was so gradual I almost missed it. It started with her tone. The way she asked me to do things changed from a request to an order. She stopped saying thank you when I brought her dinner to her home office. She started complaining about my casual clothes when her colleagues came over for weekend barbecues, introducing me with a tight smile as her husband who works from home, putting invisible quotation marks around the word works. I brushed it off. I told myself it was the stress of her new position. I told myself that high-performing executives carry a heavy burden, and I needed to be her soft landing. I was making excuses for a woman who was already halfway out the door. Looking back, the signs were flashing neon red, but love makes you blind, or at least willfully ignorant. I convinced myself that the growing distance between us was just a phase. I thought if I just cooked better meals, kept the house cleaner, and anticipated her needs more perfectly, she would eventually look at me the way she used to. But you cannot earn the respect of someone who has already decided you are beneath them. To Cassandra, I was no longer her partner. I was a utility. I was an appliance that made her life easier, like a dishwasher or a smart thermostat. And just like an appliance, she expected me to function silently, without demanding any maintenance, while she lived her real life outside the walls of our home. Then came Donovan. He was 47 years old, the newly appointed vice president of regional operations and Cassandra's direct supervisor. The first time I heard his name, it was during a Sunday brunch. Cassandra spoke about him with a reverence that made my stomach tighten. She called him a visionary. She said he recognized her raw talent in a way no previous boss ever had. Soon, Donovan became a permanent fixture in our evening conversations. Donovan said this. Donovan did that. Donovan thinks my quarterly projections are brilliant. I try to be supportive, but the atmosphere in our house began to curdle. Cassandra's schedule, which I used to manage with military precision, suddenly became erratic. The dreaded phrase late client dinner started popping up 2 or 3 times a week. At first, she would call me at 6 p.m. to apologize, sounding stressed. By the third month, she would just shoot me a text at 8 p.m., running late with Donovan and the team. Don't wait up. When she did come home, usually past midnight, things were different. She didn't smell like the sterile, air-conditioned corporate boardroom anymore. She smelled like high-end steakhouse grease, heavy red wine, and something else. A faint trace of sandalwood and gin. A man's cologne. I remember standing in the laundry room one morning, holding her silk blouse from the night before, pressing the fabric to my face and feeling my heart drop into my shoes. I tried to ask her about it. I kept my voice calm, non-accusatory. I asked if the late nights were becoming too much, if she needed me to help her restructure her workload. She snapped at me. She called me paranoid. She stood in the middle of our custom kitchen, her eyes flashing with a cold, defensive anger, and told me that if I actually understood how the corporate world worked, I wouldn't be questioning her dedication. She told me she was building a legacy for us, and my insecurity was suffocating her. Gaslighting is a slow poison. When someone you trust looks you dead in the eye and tells you that your reality is a delusion, you start to believe them. For a few weeks, I felt profound guilt. I thought I was becoming a jealous, bitter man who resented his successful wife. So, I backed off. I gave her space. I watched her pack her bags for weekend executive retreats that always seemed to happen in expensive cities. I watched her buy new lingerie that she never wore for me. I watched her smile at her phone screen, typing furiously at 11 at night, only to flip the phone face down the moment I walked into the room. The worst part wasn't the cheating. The worst part was the sheer disrespect of how sloppy she was becoming, and her absolute confidence that I was too weak and too dependent on her to ever do anything about it. She thought because I wore an apron and worked in sweatpants, I lacked a spine. She thought my silence was submission. But she forgot who she married. She forgot that before I was the guy making her morning lattes, I was the guy who analyzed behavior patterns and built psychological profiles for marketing campaigns. I knew how to observe. I knew how to read the data. And the data was screaming that my marriage was a lie. I stopped asking questions. I stopped waiting up. I greeted her with a pleasant smile when she stumbled in smelling of expensive liquor and another man's sweat. I became the perfect, oblivious husband. Because the moment you realize you are in a war zone, you don't announce your presence to the enemy. You dig a trench, you gather your ammunition, and you wait for the perfect moment to pull the trigger. The modern world makes it incredibly difficult to completely erase your tracks, especially if you share an ecosystem of devices. Cassandra was a brilliant executive, but she was technically lazy. We shared an Apple ID for years, so we could easily sync family calendars and share purchased apps. About 6 months ago, she bought a new iPad Pro for her business trips and handed her old one down to me for reading. She thought she had signed out of everything. She hadn't. I didn't snoop immediately. I held out for a long time, fighting my own instincts, hoping I was wrong. But one Tuesday afternoon, while she was supposedly in Denver for a regional logistics summit, the old iPad pinged with a calendar notification. It wasn't a corporate event. It was a reservation at a luxury boutique hotel in Napa Valley. 2 guests. That was the moment the dam broke. I took the iPad into my home office, locked the door, and went to work. I am not a professional hacker, but I know how to write code. Over the years, I had taught myself Python to automate some of my data entry work for freelance clients. I realized I could use those same skills to pull back the curtain on my wife's double life. I wrote a simple program. A script designed to cross-reference multiple streams of data. I fed it the location history buried deep in the iPad settings. I matched those coordinates with the timestamps of credit card transactions from our joint account, and then, the nail in the coffin, her digital receipts from rideshare apps. She thought she was being smart by using her corporate card for the flights to make it look official, but she was using her personal app for the ground transport. The script ran for about 10 minutes, sorting through 18 months of data. When it finished compiling the report on my second monitor, I just sat there in the silence of my office, staring at the screen. The truth was laid out in neat, undeniable rows of text. The Denver conference was a lie. The Seattle merger meeting was a lie. The late nights in the downtown office were lies. My script calculated that over the past year, Cassandra had spent 42 nights in high-end hotels across the country, always accompanied by rideshare trips that started or ended at Donovan's private residential address. Furthermore, she had been expensing expensive dinners and couple spa treatments to the company's client retention budget, signing them off under Donovan's authorization code. They weren't just having an affair. They were embezzling corporate funds to finance their romance. I remember the physical sensation of that moment perfectly. People always talk about heartbreak like it's an explosion, a violent tearing in your chest. For me, it wasn't a fire. It was ice. A cold, heavy block of ice settling in the pit of my stomach, freezing every nerve ending, every warm memory, every shred of affection I ever held for the woman I married. I didn't cry. I had shed my tears weeks ago when I first smelled his cologne on her collar. Now, looking at the spreadsheet of her betrayal, I felt nothing but a terrifying, absolute clarity. The woman I loved was dead. In her place was a corporate parasite who had used my domestic labor to build her foundation and used her company's money to sleep with her boss. I closed the laptop. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of cold water, and drank it slowly. I looked around the beautiful house we had built. I looked at the framed wedding photo on the mantel. She looked so happy then. Maybe she was. But the person in that photo no longer existed. I knew I could print the spreadsheet, slap it on the table, and demand a divorce. I could take half of everything and walk away. But that felt too easy. She would spin the narrative. She would tell her friends that we grew apart, that I was unsupportive, that she found true love with a man on her level. She would keep her high-paying job, her reputation, and her powerful new boyfriend. She would face zero consequences for the destruction she caused. No, walking away wasn't enough. She had used my words to climb the corporate ladder. I decided it was only fitting that my words would be the hammer that shattered the rungs beneath her feet. A revenge plot born of sudden rage is sloppy. It leaves fingerprints, it makes noise, and it usually ends up hurting the person executing it just as much as the target. But a revenge plot born of absolute, cold detachment? That is a work of art. I spent the next 3 weeks building the guillotine. I maintained my facade flawlessly. I cooked her favorite meals. I asked about her day. I ironed the clothes she packed for her weekends away with Donovan. And every day, when she left the house, I went into my office and drafted the masterpiece of my writing career. I decided against a simple leak. Sending anonymous emails to her company's human resources department could be swept under the rug. Donovan was a vice president. He had enough power to bury an anonymous tip and protect her. If I wanted to destroy them, the explosion had to come from inside the house. The confession had to come directly from Cassandra herself. I began writing a drafted resignation letter. But it wasn't just a letter saying I quit. It was a comprehensive, self-immolating whistleblower manifesto. I channeled everything I knew about her voice. I used her favorite corporate buzzwords: synergy, ethical alignment, transparency, leadership legacy. I structured the opening paragraphs to sound exactly like the speeches I used to write for her, idealistic, confident, perhaps a little overly dramatic. Then, halfway through the document, the tone shifted. The carefully constructed corporate facade gave way to a brutally detailed confession of executive misconduct. Written from her perspective, the letter detailed exactly how she had secured her recent promotion. It admitted to a long-standing, undisclosed romantic relationship with a direct superior. But I didn't stop at the affair. Affairs happen all the time in the corporate world, and sometimes people survive them. Financial fraud, however, is fatal. I embedded the data from my Python script directly into the text of the letter. I masked them as professional citations and hyperlinked bullet points. Client retention dinner, Chicago, August 12th, linked to a side-by-side screenshot of the $250 steakhouse receipt and the hotel room service bill charged to the company. Logistics Summit, Denver, October 4th, linked to her rideshare receipt showing a trip to Donovan's personal residence, bypassing the conference center entirely. Every claim was backed by undeniable, digital proof, neatly packaged in a PDF format. It was a suicide note for her career, crafted so perfectly in her own arrogant cadence that no one reading it would ever doubt she wrote it in a moment of extreme guilt or a manic breakdown. But writing the letter was only half the battle. Delivering it was the real challenge. If I sent it from my email or a burner account, it lacked the impact of a true confession. It needed to be blasted from her official corporate email address, sent directly to the board of directors, legal, and human resources simultaneously. That is where Marcus came in. Marcus was an old college roommate of mine. A brilliant, socially awkward guy who practically lived on energy drinks and code. More importantly, Marcus owed me. Years ago, during our senior year, he got caught up in an academic scandal that would have gotten him expelled. I took the fall for a portion of it, saving his record and allowing him to graduate. Marcus is now the director of information technology at Cassandra's logistics firm. I invited Marcus out for a beer on a Thursday night. I didn't give him all the dramatic details. I didn't need to. I just slid a manila folder across the sticky bar table. It contained printed proof of Cassandra and Donovan's embezzlement, specifically the funds they diverted from Marcus's IT budget to cover their trucks. Marcus looked at the papers, his jaw tight. He hated Donovan. Everyone in IT hated Donovan. I just need a backdoor, I told him quietly over the noise of the bar. 5 minutes of unrestricted access to the executive mail server. And I need you to set an automated archive rule on the back end, so the moment the email hits the server, it is permanently indexed and mirrored to the legal department's hard drives. No one can recall it. No one can delete it. Marcus took a slow sip of his beer. He looked at me, understanding exactly the magnitude of what I was asking. He didn't say a word. He just tapped his phone, wrote an IP address and a temporary admin credential on a napkin, and pushed it toward me. The guillotine was built. The blade was sharpened. All I needed now was for her to put her neck on the block. The opportunity arrived on a rainy Saturday night. Cassandra was returning from yet another fake conference, this time in Chicago. I knew exactly where she had been. I had watched the credit card alerts ping on my phone all weekend. $200 at a rooftop cocktail bar. $400 at a luxury spa. All while I was at home, painting the guest bedroom. She walked through the front door at roughly 9:15 p.m. The house was quiet, lit only by the dim amber glow of the kitchen island pendants. She didn't announce her arrival. She just dropped her heavy leather suitcase near the stairs with a loud thud. I was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a glass of bourbon, watching her. She kicked off one of her expensive heels, leaving the other one on for a strange, drunken, dramatic effect. She walked into the kitchen, her hair slightly messy, her eyes glassy with the kind of fearless arrogance that only comes from drinking too much high-end wine at high altitudes. She didn't look like a wife coming home to her husband. She looked like a predator returning to a cage she had outgrown. She bypassed me entirely, went straight to the wine fridge, and pulled out a bottle of Malbec. She poured herself a generous glass, spilling a few drops on the white quartz countertop. Only then did she turn to look at me. She was wearing a smear of dark red lipstick she hadn't worn in 3 years. And resting against her collarbone was a thick, gold necklace that definitely did not come from my bank account. We stared at each other for a long moment. The silence in the room was heavy, thick with the unsaid words of the past year. She took a slow sip of her wine, leaning against the counter, sizing me up. She looked at my plain gray t-shirt, my tired eyes, the half-empty glass of bourbon in my hand. I could see the exact moment she decided she was done playing the game. She was tired of sneaking around. Her ego had inflated to the point where she believed she was untouchable, and she wanted the thrill of breaking me. She let out a short, cynical laugh. It echoed sharply against the tile backsplash. "I slept with him," she said. 6 words. Slurred just enough to let me know the alcohol was doing the heavy lifting, but clear enough to make me wonder how many times she had rehearsed it in the hotel mirror. I didn't blink. I didn't move. She took another sip, emboldened by my lack of reaction. "I slept with Donovan. We've been sleeping together for almost a year. It's serious. He's going to leave his wife, and I am leaving you. She paused, bracing herself. She tightened her grip on the wine glass. She expected the explosion. She expected me to jump out of my chair, knock the bottle off the counter, scream at her, demand explanations, call her names. She wanted me to lose my mind. If I exploded, I would be the unstable, angry husband. I would be the villain in her story, the unhinged man she had to escape for her own safety and sanity. She desperately wanted a fight so she could justify her betrayal. Big deal, she added, her lip curling into a sneer when the silence stretched too long. Don't look so shocked, Silas. You had to know. We haven't been a real couple in years. Get over it. I've outgrown this life, and I've outgrown you. I looked straight through her. I didn't look at the smeared lipstick, or the gold necklace, or the defensive, aggressive posture she was holding. I just looked at the hollow, selfish core of the woman standing in front of me. I didn't yell. Yelling is for people who have lost control. Yelling is for people who do not have options. I had plenty of options, and I had all the time in the world. I reached out my hand and slowly, deliberately, picked up the thick manila envelope I had been resting under my hand for the last hour. The envelope that contained the printed, hard copy of the drafted resignation letter. The letter that was currently sitting on the executive mail server, loaded into an automated scheduling software, waiting for a final command. I didn't say a single word. I just slid the envelope across the wood grain of the dining table. It made a soft, scraping sound as it came to a stop exactly halfway between us. The envelope sat there under the warm glow of the pendant lights. Plain, unmarked, heavy with consequence. Cassandra glanced at it, then looked back at me, her brow furrowing in irritation. She was annoyed that I wasn't following her script. I wasn't giving her the emotional meltdown she needed to feel superior. What the hell is that supposed to be? She asked, her voice dripping with condescension. Divorce papers? Did you actually hire a lawyer, Silas? Because if you did, you wasted your money. Donovan's legal team is going to wipe the floor with you. You might want to read it, I said. My voice was perfectly flat. No anger. No sorrow. Just the hollow echo of a dead marriage. She scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes. She didn't even take a step toward the table. She just leaned back against the counter, let out another abrasive chuckle, and took a long drag from her wine glass. God, you are so pathetic and dramatic, she muttered. Always the starving artist. Always trying to make a moment out of nothing. I am going to bed. I'll have the movers here by Wednesday. She turned her back on me, walked heavily out of the kitchen, and began climbing the stairs. I heard the erratic thud of her one high heel hitting the wooden steps. She started humming some off-key pop song, a final, deliberate display of disrespect to let me know how little this moment, and our entire life together, mattered to her. I stayed downstairs. I sat in that wooden chair for 2 straight hours, listening to the rain hit the kitchen window. The envelope stayed completely untouched on the table. Her discarded heel lay sideways under the bar stool, looking like a piece of evidence from a crime scene the police hadn't discovered yet. At exactly 11:45 p.m., I opened my laptop. I connected to the secure VPN using the credentials Marcus had provided on that napkin. I accessed the company's back-end mail server. The interface was sterile, complex, filled with lines of code and routing protocols. I located her account. I opened the drafts folder. The manifesto was there, sitting quietly in the digital dark, loaded with the hyperlinks, the receipts, the undeniable proof of embezzlement and executive misconduct. The subject line read, Urgent Review, Ethics, Legacy, and my immediate resignation. I took a deep breath. I felt a momentary flicker of hesitation, a ghostly reminder of the man who used to love her, the man who used to make her coffee and iron her suits. But then I looked at the single, discarded high heel on the floor. I remembered the gold necklace resting against her skin. I remembered the words, big deal. Get over it. The ghost faded. Only the architect remained. I navigated to the scheduling tool. I set the recipient list, the chief executive officer, the entire board of directors, the head of human resources, the director of corporate compliance, and the chief legal counsel. 12 people in total. The 12 people who held Cassandra and Donovan's entire world in their hands. I set the delivery time for Monday morning, 9:00 a.m. Standard Time. I clicked confirm. A small green bar flashed across the screen. Message scheduled successfully. I closed the laptop. The trap was set. The timer was ticking. There was absolutely nothing in the world that could stop that email from launching on Monday morning. Marcus's script ensured that once the clock struck 9, the email would instantly duplicate into the company's permanent legal discovery archive. Cassandra couldn't delete it. Donovan couldn't intercept it. It was going to hit the executive floor like a cruise missile. I stood up, walked over to the table, and picked up my empty bourbon glass. I looked at the envelope one last time. She thought I was just the guy who cooked her dinner and managed her expense reports. She thought I was a harmless domestic servant. She completely forgot that I was also the one who used to write her speeches. She forgot that I knew her voice better than she knew it herself. I rinsed my glass in the sink, turned off the kitchen lights, and went to sleep in the guest bedroom. I slept deeply, dreamlessly, for the first time in an entire year. Thank you for watching so far. If you are enjoying this story of ultimate payback, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below telling me which city you are watching from. Every single comment helps push this video to more people who love a good dose of karma. Now, let's get back to the fireworks. Sunday passed like a ghost ship drifting through our house. There is a very specific kind of silence that happens when a marriage is already dead, but the bodies haven't been buried yet. I woke up early, made my coffee, and went outside to trim the hedges. I wanted to be out of the house when she woke up. I didn't want to look at her face and risk giving anything away. When Cassandra finally came downstairs around 11 in the morning, she acted like the confession from the night before had never happened. Or worse, she acted like it was just a minor administrative update to our relationship. She walked into the kitchen wearing an oversized white t-shirt, presumably stolen from the luxury hotel in Chicago, and poured herself a cup of the coffee I had made. She didn't even glance at the dining table. The thick manila envelope was exactly where I had left it, perfectly centered on the dark wood. It was sitting right there in the open, holding the absolute destruction of her entire universe, and she was too busy scrolling through her phone to even notice it. She opened the refrigerator, sighed loudly, and complained that we were out of the expensive almond milk. She asked me, without looking up from her screen, if I could run to the boutique grocery store down the street. I was standing by the back door, holding a pair of gardening shears. I just looked at her. I told her I was busy with the yard work and she would have to get it herself. She rolled her eyes, muttered something under her breath about how I had all the time in the world, and walked back upstairs. That was the last normal conversation we ever had. Monday morning arrived with the heavy, gray light of an impending storm. The air in the house felt thick. Cassandra was up at 6 a.m., going through her usual high-powered executive routine. Shower. Blowout. A sharp navy blue tailored suit. She spent 20 minutes doing her makeup, making sure she looked like the brilliant, untouchable vice president she believed she was meant to be. She came down to the kitchen at 8:30. She grabbed her leather tote bag, slipped on her heels, and grabbed a travel mug of coffee. The envelope was still on the table. She actually bumped the edge of the table with her hip as she walked past it, but she didn't look down. Her mind was already at the office. Her mind was already on Donovan, on her status, on her power. "See you tonight," she tossed over her shoulder as she walked out the door into the garage. I didn't answer. I just listened to the heavy thud of the door closing, the hum of her luxury SUV starting up, and the sound of tires rolling out of the driveway. I walked over to the kitchen clock. It was 8:45 a.m. I sat down at the table, right in front of the envelope, and folded my hands. I had 15 minutes. 15 minutes until the server protocol Marcus had written bypassed all internal security measures. 15 minutes until the perfectly crafted, highly detailed confession landed in the inbox of every single person who had the power to ruin her. I didn't feel anxious. I didn't feel guilty. I just felt a deep, profound stillness. I watched the second hand of the clock sweep in endless, perfect circles. 8:50. 8:55. 8:59. 9 a.m. At exactly 9 a.m., the digital guillotine dropped. I wasn't in the corporate boardroom to see it happen, but I didn't need to be. I had spent enough time in that world to know exactly how the dominoes were falling. Somewhere in that glass and steel tower, 12 members of the board of directors, the chief executive officer, the head of human resources, and the chief legal counsel all heard the familiar chime of a high-priority email landing in their inboxes. They saw the sender, Cassandra, director of regional logistics. They saw the subject line, urgent review, ethics, legacy, and my immediate resignation. At first, they probably thought it was a joke, or a dramatic prelude to a contract renegotiation. But then they opened it. The email started exactly like the speeches I used to write for her. It spoke about the heavy burden of leadership. It talked about how true corporate synergy requires absolute transparency and how a legacy built on shadows cannot stand the light of day. It was beautifully written. It was arrogant, idealistic, and perfectly Cassandra. But by the third paragraph, the velvet glove came off and the iron fist smashed through the screen. The text shifted from philosophical musings to a surgical, brutal confession. It stated, in clear and unequivocal terms, that her recent promotion to director was not based on merit, but was the direct result of a 12-month, undisclosed sexual relationship with Vice President Donovan. It explicitly outlined that this relationship violated Clause 7 of the Executive Code of Conduct regarding subordinate relationships. If it had stopped there, it would have been a massive scandal. An HR nightmare. But I didn't write it to be a nightmare. I wrote it to be an execution. The email continued into the financial data. It confessed to a systematic abuse of the corporate client retention budget to fund illicit travel. It directed the board to the embedded hyperlinks. I knew exactly what was happening in those offices. I knew that Brenda, the head of human resources, was clicking the first link. I knew she was staring at her screen in absolute horror as a split-screen PDF opened. On the left, a corporate expense report for a $2,000 client dinner in Chicago. On the right, the synced Uber receipt from Cassandra's personal account, showing a ride from the airport directly to a luxury spa resort, miles away from the financial district. I knew the chief legal counsel was clicking the second link, viewing the exact dates of the Denver Logistics Summit, cross-referenced with a hotel invoice for a couple's massage booked under Donovan's personal credit card, but reimbursed through the company portal. There were no loopholes. There was no room for interpretation. The email didn't just accuse them of sleeping together. It provided a flawless, heavily documented paper trail of corporate fraud, signed, sealed, and delivered from Cassandra's own authenticated account. And thanks to Marcus, the moment that email hit their servers, a hidden protocol automatically archived it into the permanent legal discovery vault. Even if Donovan tried to call the IT department to wipe the servers, it was too late. The data was locked down. The board had a legal obligation to act on it immediately or risk personal liability for the missing funds. It was 9:03 a.m. The explosion was complete. The fallout was just beginning. At 9:15 a.m., my cell phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. I didn't recognize the number, but I didn't need caller ID to know who it was. I let it ring 3 times before I calmly slid my finger across the screen to answer. "Hello," I said. My voice was perfectly level. There was a ragged, heavy intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Silas?" It was Donovan. The great, visionary vice president. The man who had been sleeping with my wife in expensive hotel rooms on the company dime. He didn't sound visionary right now. He sounded like a man who was standing on the tracks, watching a freight train barrel toward him, completely unable to move. "Silas, did you do this?" His voice was shaking. It was a tight, high-pitched whisper. I could picture him in his corner office, the blinds pulled down, pacing the carpet like a trapped animal. "Do what, Donovan?" I asked smoothly. "Don't play games with me," he hissed, the panic breaking through his attempted whisper. The email. The resignation email from Cassandra's account. It just hit the entire executive mailing list. "It has receipts, Silas." It has internal routing numbers. He stopped to take another desperate breath. Who did you send this to? Did you send it to the press? Tell me you didn't send it to the external stakeholders. I picked up my coffee mug and took a slow sip. It was lukewarm, but it tasted incredible. I didn't send anything to anyone, Donovan, I replied. Cassandra sent a resignation letter. I assume she finally grew a conscience about stealing company funds to finance your weekend getaways. You should be proud of her personal growth. Silas, listen to me, he pleaded. The arrogance was completely gone. He was begging. We can fix this. I can authorize a massive severance package for her. I can write you a personal check right now. Just tell me how you access the server. Tell me how to pull the metadata back before the auditors get here. I looked out the kitchen window at the bright green leaves of the oak tree in my backyard. The world outside was so peaceful, completely untouched by the hurricane ripping through his office. You can't pull it back, Donovan, I said quietly. It was routed through the automated archiving protocol. Legal already has a permanent copy. The board already has a permanent copy. You are currently standing in a burning building and you are asking me for a glass of water. There was a long, agonizing silence on the line. I could hear the faint sound of a siren somewhere in the background of his city office. For the love of God, Silas, he whispered, his voice cracking with genuine terror. What did you do? I gave you exactly what you wanted, I told him. You wanted my wife. You wanted my life. Now, you get the bill for it. Have a good morning, Donovan. I ended the call. I blocked his number. I placed the phone face down on the counter. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the artillery has stopped firing. Cassandra didn't have early morning meetings on Mondays. She usually spent the first 2 hours of her day at a high-end coffee shop near the office, answering emails on her iPad and acting like she was too important to sit at a desk. Because of this routine, she was entirely insulated from the initial blast radius. She was sitting at a corner table, sipping a $7 oat milk latte, completely unaware that her name was currently being screamed in the executive boardroom. At 9:20 a.m., her phone started vibrating. It was an automated text message from the corporate human resources system. Alert: your network access has been temporarily suspended pending security review. Please report to the Human Resources Office immediately. She frowned, swiped away the notification, and tried to log into her work email app. The screen flashed red. Authentication failed. Account locked. She tried the corporate Slack channel. Locked. She tried to access the cloud drive. Locked. Annoyed, assuming it was just a stupid IT glitch, she decided to call Donovan. It went straight to voicemail. She tried his private number. Straight to voicemail. That was when the first cold drop of panic hit her stomach. Donovan never ignored her calls. Never. She quickly gathered her things, practically running to her car. She started the engine and threw it into gear. As she pulled out of the parking lot, her personal email chimed. It was an automated forward from the legal department. The subject line made her slam on the brakes in the middle of the street. Urgent review, ethics, legacy, and my immediate resignation. She pulled over to the curb, her hands suddenly trembling. She opened the email. It was a copy of the manifesto. She read the first line. She read the second paragraph. She saw the hyperlinks. She saw the exact dates, the exact dollar amounts, the exact locations of every single lie she had told over the last year. And then she saw the attached document at the bottom of the email. It was a PDF file. The file name was drafted resignation.pdf. Her mind flashed back to Saturday night. The dark kitchen. The smell of bourbon. The plain manila envelope sitting halfway across the wooden dining table. The envelope I had told her she might want to read. The envelope she had laughed at, called dramatic, and left sitting near her discarded shoe. She had left the house in such a rush this morning, she hadn't even looked at the table. She grabbed her phone and dialed my number. I watched it light up on the screen sitting on the kitchen counter. I let it ring. She called again. I let it ring. She sent a text message. It was just one word in all capital letters, please. I didn't reply. I picked up the manila envelope from the table, walked over to the paper shredder in my home office, and fed it through the machine. I watched the physical copy of her destruction turn into tiny, unreadable ribbons of paper. Cassandra drove the remaining 2 miles to the corporate headquarters like a woman fleeing a ghost. She parked in her reserved spot, her hands shaking so badly she could barely pull the keys out of the ignition. She practically ran toward the massive glass doors of the main lobby. She approached the security turnstiles and slapped her ID badge against the scanner. Instead of the cheerful green beep, the machine let out a harsh, flat red buzz. Access denied. She tried it again, hitting the plastic harder against the glass. Red buzz. Access denied. She looked over at the reception desk. Fiona, the 25-year-old receptionist who usually greeted Cassandra with a bright smile and a compliment about her outfit, was staring straight down at her keyboard. Fiona wouldn't make eye contact. The entire lobby, usually buzzing with morning chatter, had gone dead silent. Everyone was looking at her. The junior executives, the interns, the maintenance staff. They were all staring at her like she was a walking corpse. Fiona finally picked up her desk phone, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, security? Miss Cassandra is in the lobby. Cassandra's face went pale. Fiona, what is going on? Why is my badge locked? She demanded, trying to project authority, but her voice cracked. 2 large security guards in dark suits stepped out from the elevator bank. They didn't look angry, they just looked incredibly professional, which was somehow much worse. Ma'am, the taller guard said, stepping between her and the turnstiles. We have been instructed to escort you directly to the 3rd-floor legal conference room. You are not permitted to access your office, speak to any staff members, or access any company terminals. Cassandra felt her legs go weak. I am a regional director, she snapped, a desperate, final attempt to use the power that had already evaporated. You cannot treat me like a criminal. I need to speak to Donovan right now. The guard didn't blink. Vice President Donovan is currently in a closed-door meeting with the Ethics Committee and External Counsel. Please come with us, ma'am. If you refuse, we are instructed to contact local law enforcement regarding the financial discrepancies in your account. That was the kill shot. The mention of law enforcement. Cassandra's shoulders slumped. The arrogant, untouchable executive died right there in the lobby. She nodded slowly, her face burning with humiliation as the 2 guards flanked her and walked her toward the freight elevator, keeping her away from the main staff areas. It was the longest, most humiliating walk of her entire life. The legal conference room was a windowless box on the 3rd floor, designed specifically for firing people without causing a scene. When the guards opened the door and ushered Cassandra inside, the air was freezing cold. Sitting on one side of a long mahogany table were 3 people. Brenda, the terrifying, iron-willed director of human resources. The chief legal counsel. And sitting at the very edge of the table, looking like he had aged 10 years in a single morning, was Donovan. Cassandra looked at Donovan, expecting him to jump up, to defend her, to tell them this was all a massive misunderstanding. Donovan didn't even look up. He stared at his trembling hands, resting flat on the wood. He was a broken man. Please take a seat, Cassandra, Brenda said. Her voice carried zero empathy. It was the voice of a butcher looking at a piece of meat. Cassandra sat down slowly. Brenda pushed a thick blue folder across the table. We received your resignation email this morning, Brenda began. We have also reviewed the attached metadata, the location logs, and the financial receipts outlining a pattern of systemic embezzlement and ethics violations. I didn't send that email. Cassandra blurted out, her voice frantic. My husband sent it. He hacked my account. He fabricated those receipts. You have to believe me, this is a revenge plot. He is insane. The chief legal counsel leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. That is an interesting theory. However, we had our IT director, Marcus, run an immediate diagnostic on the server. The logs show the email was drafted and scheduled internally, using your authenticated credentials, from an IP address mapped directly to your home network. Furthermore, The financial receipts provided match our internal corporate card statements perfectly. Cassandra's breath caught in her throat. Marcus, the IT director, Silas's old college roommate. In a fraction of a second, the entire architecture of the trap became visible to her. She realized Silas hadn't just acted alone. He had recruited an insider. He had built a cage she couldn't break out of, and Marcus had handed him the keys. Even if we were to entertain the idea that your husband pressed the send button, Brenda interrupted sharply, you are not denying the contents of the email. Are you denying that you stayed at a luxury spa in Chicago while expensing it as a client dinner? Are you denying the hotel bookings under Vice President Donovan's name? Cassandra looked at Donovan again. Say something, she whispered. Tell them it was your authorization. You approved it. Donovan finally looked up. His eyes were red and hollow. I have already tendered my resignation to the board, he said quietly. I am cooperating fully with the internal audit. You should sign the papers, Cassandra. It's over. He threw her under the bus to save himself from prison. That is the reality of corporate affairs. When the ship sinks, the rats drown each other to stay afloat. Brenda opened the blue folder and spun it around so it faced Cassandra. This is a termination agreement with a waiver of severance. You are forfeiting all unvested stock options, your annual bonus, and your corporate benefits, effective immediately. In exchange, the company agrees not to pursue criminal fraud charges regarding the misappropriated funds, provided you sign a strict non-disclosure agreement and never contact any employee of this firm again. Cassandra stared at the paper. It was the end of everything. Her title, her salary, her prestige. The entire identity she had built by standing on my shoulders. If you do not sign it right now, the legal counsel added coldly, we will hand the fraud file over to the district attorney by noon. Cassandra picked up the heavy black pen sitting next to the folder. Her hand was shaking so violently she could barely grip it. She didn't read the contract. She just pressed the tip of the pen to the signature line and scribbled her name, sealing her own ruin. Cassandra took an Uber home because the company had immediately deactivated her corporate lease vehicle. She sat in the back of the cheap sedan, staring out the window at the passing city, feeling completely hollow. She had no job. She had no powerful lover. She had no leverage. She pulled up to our house in the suburbs around 2 in the afternoon. The driveway was empty. My car was gone. She unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was immaculately clean. The air smelled slightly of lemon cleaner and quiet. It was the kind of quiet that hurts your ears. She dropped her heavy leather tote bag on the floor in the hallway. Silas? She called out. Her voice echoed off the high ceilings. There was no answer. She walked into the kitchen. The manila envelope was gone from the table. The coffee pot had been washed and put away. She walked upstairs, her heart pounding with a new, terrifying realization. She went into the master bedroom and opened my side of the walk-in closet. It was completely empty. My suits, my shoes, my casual clothes. All gone. She walked into my home office. My laptop, my monitors, my external hard drives, my notebooks. All gone. The only thing left on my desk was a single piece of paper, held down by my silver wedding band. She picked it up with trembling fingers. It wasn't a long letter. It wasn't a dramatic final speech. It was just a printed copy of the email she had sent to the board that morning. Across the top, written in my neat, measured handwriting, were 3 words. Get over it. She fell to her knees in the middle of the empty office. The reality of what she had lost finally crushed her. She hadn't just lost a marriage. She had lost the invisible architect who had built her entire world. She had burned down her own house just to feel the warmth of the fire, and now she was sitting alone in the ashes. I didn't stay in the city to watch the smoke clear. By the time Cassandra was signing her termination papers in that freezing legal conference room, I was already 200 miles away, driving down the interstate with the windows down and the radio playing loud. I moved to a mid-sized coastal town. I rented a bright, airy apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the water. I bought new furniture. I bought new clothes. I stopped wearing sweatpants and aprons. Within a month, I reached out to my old network in the strategic communications industry. I didn't mention the drama. I just told them I was stepping back into the arena. Because I had spent the last several years secretly writing some of the most highly praised executive speeches in the regional logistics sector, my portfolio was flawless. I landed a massive consulting contract with a tech startup within 3 weeks. I was making my own money again. I was building my own name. Occasionally, Marcus would send me an encrypted message just to check in. He told me the fallout at the logistics firm was legendary. Donovan's wife found out about the scandal, filed for a brutal divorce, and took him for everything he had. Donovan was currently working as a mid-level manager at a regional warehouse, completely blacklisted from the executive tier. As for Cassandra, she had to sell the house in the suburbs to pay off the massive legal fees and debts she had accumulated without my income to support her lifestyle. She couldn't get a job in management anywhere in the state. Background checks in the corporate world are ruthless, and while she avoided prison, the Whisper Network made sure her resume went straight into the shredder at every major firm. Last Marcus heard, she was working as a junior sales representative for a company that sold office supplies. I didn't feel sorry for her. I didn't feel angry anymore either. I just felt a profound sense of closure. When you spend your life elevating someone else, you give them the tools to destroy you. But what they always seem to forget is that the person who builds the machine knows exactly where the fatal flaws are hidden. I didn't shout. I didn't break plates. I didn't beg for her to love me again. I just took the language she used to make herself feel powerful, and I weaponized it against her. I slid that envelope across the table, knowing it contained the match that would burn her world down. I used the very skills she took for granted to orchestrate her absolute ruin. Some people might hear this story and tell me I went too far. They might say that revenge is toxic, that I should have been the bigger person, filed for a quiet divorce, and walked away with my half of the assets. They might say that completely annihilating her career and destroying her life was a malicious, sociopathic overreaction to a common marital betrayal. But when you dedicate your life to building someone's empire in the dark, and they use the money and the status you helped them achieve to fund an affair with their boss, don't you have the absolute right to demolish that empire? When someone looks at the shattered pieces of your heart and tells you to get over it, isn't it only fair that you give them something truly devastating to get over? Tell me, am I the A***** hole? Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now. It helps us bring more of these stories to life. See you in the next one.